The Spanish Tickler, while being just another one of our worst punishments in recorded human history, does stand out from the rest of them. It's the most devilish name for a punishment we've ever come across. For example, it didn't tickle at all, it ripped, it mauled, and shredded, and killed. We're going to get right to it and explain how the tickler worked, and then we'll talk about some poor souls who were allegedly subjected to this punishment at some point in the dark past, including Christian martyrs, who, if the legends are true, had it pretty bad, to say the least. Basically, the instrument was supposed to be an extension of the torturer's hand, although rather than just tickle, it massaged the body of the condemned. As the story goes, the torturer massaged the feet, the hands, the chest, the back, and even the face, all with a claw, a very sharp claw. The closest thing to this in modern times would be the enhanced hands of the horror movie character Freddy Krueger. You've all seen what happened to someone in those movies after they were tickled by Freddy, a thing of nightmares indeed. Freddy was usually fast, but the torturers using the tickler reportedly took their time. The person was usually strung up somewhere, sometimes in public, and the torturer would then begin the operation. The claw was so sharp that it cut right through the flesh, almost down to the bone. The victim bled profusely wherever the claw went. You could only imagine what they looked like after their whole body had been tickled. Such a punishment, if taken that far, would almost always result in death. There have been a lot of terrible punishments throughout history, but this one seems perhaps a bit more sadistic than most. Maybe so sadistic that it never really happened. That's what we'll look at now. The closest relative it has is arguably China's slow slicing execution, aka Ling Chi, which definitely happened since the Chinese kept numerous records and there are even disturbing photos of Ling Chi in existence. Even though Ling Chi has been called death by 1,000 cuts, when we researched the punishment not long ago, we discovered that in most cases only a few chunks of flesh were usually sliced off before the person was beheaded. Still, it was gruesome punishment, and it wasn't uncommon in China for hundreds of years. But what about the tickler? How common was that? Does Europe have records like China does, detailing when people were tortured and killed this way? Let's investigate. You can find some samples of the tickler in museums. This particular tickler can be found at the Inquisition exhibition, which is in the Palacio de los Olvidados of Granada. Here is the accompanying text. This instrument was used to rip off flesh, removing it from the bone in any part of the body, the face, the back, the breasts, the chest, used with the prisoner shackled to a rack. For the tormentor, the advantage over the skin-stripping whip was that the incision could be precisely controlled, so that the lacerations were produced in the places and the depth desired. That sounds rather horrendous. But if you believe quite a few historians, some of the stories about torture during the Inquisitions have been exaggerated a fair bit. That description you've just heard sounds about as nasty as you can get, so before we believe it, we think we need to take a deeper dive into the history of the tickler. We found some more information in the World Heritage Encyclopedia, where the device was called the Spanish Tickler, as well as the cat's claw. It told us that it was used mostly on thieves and unfaithful wives, saying the victims didn't usually die during their painful massage, but they died later due to the deep wounds being infected. According to the same article, the torturers purposely didn't wash the instrument for that reason. It's also said that the person would often be hung up by chains, so the tickler would be connected to a stick. Many websites paint the same picture, but what they failed to do is give real-life examples of when it happened. And that's not good enough for us. We found some more images that circulate the web, but one of those is actually taken from the History of Torture adult coloring book. There is one more picture commonly used, but we can't say where it came from and if it was based on an actual execution. It could have been sketched a few years ago, for all we know. We know for a fact that in 1252, Pope Innocent IV released the papal bull Ad Extirpanda. A papal bull was a public decree. It said that torture was a-okay as long as it was used just one time and didn't kill the person. Once the person did confess, the inquisitor had to say he was certain that what the guy had said was the truth. That was how they did things in the past, so if you wanted someone to admit they were a heretic, you could achieve that with the right amount of pain inflicted on them. Thing is, historians these days tell us that while plenty of instruments of torture dazzle and shock the public when they're exhibited, there isn't much proof that some of them were used, and that includes the Spanish tickler. The inquisitors were also quite fastidious when it came to keeping records, and we can find no mention of someone being shredded by a claw. That's not to say people weren't brutally tortured. For instance, there's plenty of evidence for the rack being used by the inquisitors. Taken to its extreme, the rack could pull limbs from their joints, so it was hardly a walk in the park. The inquisitors called it potro. In the year 1597 on the Canary Islands, a suspected heretic was tortured on the rack. The inquisitors took the minutes. This is what they wrote about each turn of the wheel that pulled on the man's limbs. On being given these, he said first, "O God," and then there's no mercy. After the turns he was admonished, and he said, "I don't know what to say, oh dear God." Then 3 more turns of the cord were ordered to be given, and after 2 of them he said, oh God, there's no mercy, oh God, help me, help me." The reason we told you this is because if the Spanish tickler was used as a go-to torture method during the Inquisitions, there would be some record of it. But don't go yet, we did find something equally as bad that could have happened. It was called combing, which was more or less the same as being mutilated by a claw. You can imagine in this case the claw looked a little bit like a sharp garden rake, or maybe a brush you used to comb your dog. Only the teeth were larger, so the skin and flesh could be ripped off. You have a long way to go back to find the first instance when a person was shredded and killed by the dreaded comb. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus wrote about it in the book of the Histories. In short, he said Pantaleon, half-brother of King Croesus, tried to take the Lydian throne. He failed and was combed to death. Just so you know, Lydia was pretty much today's Western Turkey. And that was way back in the 6th century BC, but there are more recent accounts of deadly combing. Early Christians were tortured with the comb, or at least that's what some people will tell you. That's because this was the era of Christian persecution in the Roman Empire. Take, for instance, a man named Blaise of Sebastia, a guy that spread the good word in the 4th century. That stopped in the year 316 after the Roman Emperor Licinius ordered that all Christians in the city of Sebastia be executed. As the legend goes, he went after the bishop, Mr. Blaise, now Saint Blaise, after what he went through. You could read all about that in the Acts of St. Blaise. It might be an apocryphal story because some of those early Christian writers sometimes didn't let the facts get in the way of a good tale. The story goes that Blaise performed a miracle on the way to his jail cell when he saved a choking kid. The mother's only kid, of course. This didn't impress the Romans and Blaise was ripped apart by the comb, after which they chopped his head off. He was fast-tracked to martyrdom after that. If you want something a bit more solid than that story, we don't really have it. There was St. Antonius of Beba, who it said was combed and killed, but this story might also be mostly fiction. One account goes that a Roman governor ordered that he be shot with arrows, but Beba wasn't hurt at all. He also survived being crucified upside down. Yeah, apparently that was a thing. This is how the story goes, which is much better from the horse's mouth. The governor of Pharma tortured Antonius at times by combing his body with iron combs, and at other times by casting him in a cauldron filled with boiling oil. But the Lord strengthened and healed him. Afterward, they cut off his head, and thus he received the crown of martyrdom. We'll go out on a limb here and perhaps risk upsetting some viewers, but if it was written that he survived being filled with arrows and then survived the usually dependable crucifixion process, we think we have to question if he was ever combed. We're not saying he wasn't executed, but that the story was somewhat embellished. 2 other martyrs survived a terrible combing, and what happened to them after was equally dark, if they aren't 100% mythologies. Here's a bit from the legend of Saint Hilaria. The governor intensified his torture by making gashes in her body with an iron comb, and he drove red-hot iron pegs into her ears. Afterward, he bound her along with 7,600 martyrs, took them with him, and departed. While they were on the ship, a crocodile jumped from the water and snatched away an only child from his mother, who wept and lamented for her son. Hilaria then prayed to God that the crocodile brought back the kid without a scratch on him. Hilaria wasn't so fortunate. The governor subjected her to a great fire, but like something from a Monty Python sketch, she was okay. He then cut off her limbs and head, and that was how she became a martyr. St. Febronia had it equally as bad, but according to Catholic.org, she was very likely a purely fictitious personage. Legend has it that she was executed in the year 304. The very much real Roman Emperor Diocletian took a disliking to her after she turned down his offer to worship idols in exchange for some nice gifts. She was then crushed with a wheel and was subjected to an iron comb until her flesh was completely torn. She prayed after that, so he took off her tongue and removed a few teeth. She became a martyr after she was decapitated. As we said, these are legends. Some people might believe in them, but most Christians will tell you that stories are merely mythology to represent those who were persecuted for their religion. There is, though, a lot of combing going on, so you have to ask where that came from. We really don't know. But prior to those people we just mentioned being combed before their imminent death, a Jewish sage known as Rabbi Akiva was possibly tortured in a very similar way after the Bar Kokhba revolt. That revolt definitely happened. It's hard to say just how he died because there are different accounts, but it seems he may have been ordered to stop teaching Torah, to which he refused and was tortured with a comb, no less. So, after hearing all that, we imagine that you're still not so sure just how many times the Spanish tickler, the cat's claw, or the comb was used throughout history. We've done our best to try and find some reliable evidence of those things being used, but we have to concede that the facts we found are questionable. Still, that hasn't stopped a plethora of websites detailing skin shredding in bloody disgusting detail. Possibly the artifacts in museums were really used, we just don't know. We even found a tickler for sale on an antiques website. It could be yours for just $2,695. We suggest you don't buy it. Now you need to watch What Made the Spanish Inquisition So Horrible, or have a look at Crucifixion, Worst Punishments in the History of Mankind.